Story 1. My ex-girlfriend who slept with my brother a day before our wedding reached out to me 12 years later. A week before my wedding. But this time, I need revenge. I, 38M, am getting married to my beautiful girlfriend, 35F, of 4 years in less than a week. This is my second engagement. 12 years ago, I almost got married to my ex-girlfriend, 38F. She was my high school sweetheart and we'd been together for almost 10 years, so naturally, and we'd even lived together for 5 years, so naturally I was ready to get married, and from the looks of it, so was she. My family loved my ex as well, so they were thrilled when I announced the news of our engagement. But it didn't happen because just one day before the wedding, my ex ended up sleeping with my brother, 34M. My ex had told me to spend the night before the wedding at a hotel, while she stayed home, since she believed that we needed to stay separately to avoid bad luck, and I did what she asked of me. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I'd forgotten my shoes back home and had to go back for them a few hours after I'd reached the hotel. When I went back home, I was surprised to see that the lights were out in the living room since my ex hated turning out the lights while leaving a room. I couldn't believe that she'd remembered. I went in and headed straight to the bedroom since that's where I'd kept the shoebox because that's how special it was to me. But when I opened the door to my room, I was greeted with the worst thing I'd ever seen. My ex was lying in bed with my own little brother and was so caught up in their act that they barely even noticed that I'd entered the room. Only after a few seconds did they notice me, but I'd literally frozen up and had no idea how to react. My world came crashing down around me, and as soon as I realized what I just witnessed, I made a run for it while my ex called after me. I drove back to the hotel hyperventilating and panicking and straight up refusing to believe what I'd seen. I was supposed to get married the next day, so this was just insane. It took me a while to compose myself once I got to my room, and when I finally managed to calm down, I ended up sobbing for at least an hour. Thankfully, I hadn't told my ex which hotel I was in, so she couldn't get to me and could only text me, which is what she did. She sent me a bunch of apology texts and tried to convince me that this was just a one-time thing, but I highly doubted that. She also said that the wedding was freaking her out, so she needed to blow off some steam, and my brother had always been there for her, so she didn't know whom to turn to. I could hardly believe that she was even trying to explain herself after what I'd seen and blocked her immediately. I also blocked my brother since I wasn't interested in any of their bullcrap apologies. Took me a while, but I managed to pull myself together and canceled all the arrangements for the wedding first and foremost because no matter how much money I lost, I was going to get out of this mess. My ex had just wasted 10 years of my life, so I didn't mind wasting a few thousand as long as it meant that I wouldn't have to be with her anymore. The next thing that I did was I called my parents up and told them what had happened. They were really confused about whether they should be consoling me or cutting my brother off, so I gave them some time to think about it. By then it was pretty late in the evening, so I ordered myself some dinner and then cried myself to sleep. After that day, I only ever saw my ex twice. Once when she came back home to pack up all her things and leave, and the next a couple of years later at a mutual friend's party where she tried to talk to me. But I left as soon as I spotted her coming my way. My brother and I also haven't spoken since then because my parents have cut him off for what he did to me. Last I heard, he was working in Europe and hasn't come back here for 3 years now. Now anyway, that was all in the past and I've managed to move on from that horrible episode. I'm in a better place now and definitely with a better woman whom I trust wholeheartedly. It was all going well until a few days back. Exactly 1 week before my wedding, my ex reached out to me. I don't know how she found out about me or my wedding, but she contacted me from a new Facebook account since I'd blocked her original account first and sent me a ton of messages about how devastated she was to hear that I was getting married again. It was strange to me that she said again, because even though we almost did get married, we never really were married. But anyway, it felt like a total déjà vu the way she was pleading with me to take her back in spite of what she'd done and how I was the only man she'd ever loved. It really got to me and I even told my fiancé about it immediately. Part of me was so perturbed by this that I wanted to give her a piece of my mind for bothering me before my wedding, but another more unforgiving part of me really wanted revenge. I knew that I'd done the right thing all those years back and had dealt with the situation like an adult. But this time I wanted to mess her up so bad that she wouldn't even think of ever getting back in touch with me again. When I told my fiancé what I was feeling, she was totally on board with it as well because even though she'd been cheated on in the past and while it wasn't a 10-year relationship, it still hurt, so she knew how I felt. So this time, instead of just letting it go, we came up with a plan to get revenge and make sure that my ex went through the same heartache that she put me through. This is why a couple of hours after I received her text, I decided to text her back saying that I was finally ready to talk to her. She told me that she was ready to come to my place right that second, but I told her to get a room in a nearby hotel and I'd meet her there the next day so that my fiancé wouldn't feel suspicious. Of course, my fiancé was right beside me while I was talking to her. She agreed to all of it, and so the next day I went to her hotel at the time we'd agreed upon. She seemed overjoyed to see me and was actually crying happy tears, but she'd be crying real tears in a couple of minutes. She sat me down and started explaining how she'd been so sorry about what had happened for these past 12 years and wanted to make it up to me but didn't know how to get through to me until she heard from a friend that I was getting married again. And she just knew that she had to text me one last time or else she'd lose me forever. I listened to her intently and even pretended to be interested and held her hands while she spoke. Meanwhile, I was just waiting for my fiancé to show up. Almost 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door and I rushed to open it. My fiancé entered, followed by all our groomsmen and bridesmaids wearing masks of my brother's face. They'd carried a cake in as well, and even that had my brother's face smiling up at us. My ex was horrified and couldn't even come up with words to say anything. We yelled, "Surprise!" while she looked on with a shocked expression on her face because I'm sure nobody would have ever seen this coming. We managed to convince the hotel staff that we were surprising her, and it was relatively easy since she'd already informed them to let in any guest who wanted to visit her, which she'd meant just for me, but I had other plans. After she was able to process what was happening, she started sobbing and mumbling some incoherent gibberish while crying, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. She'd had the audacity to message me just a week before my wedding even after cheating on me with my own brother a day before we were supposed to get married. So now she'd have to face the consequences of her actions. I told her that this was what she deserved and that if she thought she ever had a chance with me after cheating on me, then she was dead wrong. She had no business texting me after what she'd put me through, and I was glad that she was hurt by what I'd done because she'd brought it upon herself. I was really cold and curt while saying all of this, but she continued to sob and said that if I didn't want her back then I should have just ignored and blocked her instead of going out of my way to humiliate her this way. But I didn't feel sorry for her in the slightest. Not then and not now. I told her never to speak to me again and then left her crying by herself in the hotel room. Now I'm supposed to get married in 2 days, but some of my fiancé's friends want me to apologize to my ex since they think that the way I told her off that day was harsh and no matter what she'd done, she didn't deserve this. My groomsmen don't share this sentiment since they've known me since middle school, and they're also well aware of how I had to battle depression and fight for my life in the years following my breakup with my ex because of what had happened. They also knew how much I loved her and what she'd meant to me, so they didn't mind what I'd done. My fiancé's friends had probably been expecting some high school drama that they could gossip about later, but this was too raw and real for them. My fiancé is on my side and doesn't think I should apologize, but her friends are refusing to be part of the wedding if I don't do that. Now I'm really torn up because on one hand, I don't want my fiancé to be upset on our wedding day. After all, she really values her friends. But I also don't think I owe my ex any apology at all. She could have just stayed out of my life and this never would have happened, but she just didn't want to see me happy. In fact, she's still trying to play the victim here and keeps sending me texts from spam accounts about how I broke her heart and that this will definitely come back to me someday. I don't particularly care for this brand of emotional manipulation, not for my ex and most certainly not for my fiancé's bridesmaids. Now I know that she's never going to tell me to apologize just for her sake, but I sort of feel obliged to at this point and that's why I'm here. I'm running out of time and I need to decide what I'm going to do right now. ITA for humiliating my cheating ex after she tried to get back with me just a week before my wedding? Date 1. So the response on this has been pretty diverse, to say the least. There's just 1 day to go until the wedding and I've decided to speak to my fiancé before I actually do anything. Like most people had suggested, I talked to her about how I'd been feeling and as soon as I told her, she said that I absolutely didn't have to apologize to my ex just because her bridesmaids thought so, and if that offended them then they could skip her wedding. She told me that her bridesmaids had no idea what had happened and most of them thought that I'd overreacted even when she explained that my ex and I had been together for a decade and had cheated on me with my brother. Things that are incomprehensibly cruel and don't deserve to be forgiven. But they weren't convinced and still believed that I was being unreasonable and owed her an apology. So she gave up trying to explain my side of things to them and even told them that they didn't have to attend our wedding if they didn't feel like it. She hasn't spoken to her friends in one whole day, and it seems really unlikely that they'll be attending. One of them even paid her back for the cost of the bridesmaid dress that she'd bought them all, and she thinks that most of them are going to skip. She's putting up a strong front for my sake. But I know she's hurting since these women have been her friends since high school. My fiancé says she doesn't care, but I know she does deep down, so I've decided to talk to her friends and try to convince them myself. As for my ex, well, she's still being a total pain. A few hours ago, she managed to call me and then wasted 15 whole minutes trying to argue with me. She was really trying to convince me that I was still in love with her but was just too proud to admit it. And why was she saying that? Well, apparently it's because I went to such lengths only to humiliate her, so it obviously meant that I still did have feelings for her deep down. Yeah, she's right, but those feelings are of hate and disgust. For whatever reason, she believes that I just wanted to see her one last time, which is why I'd held her hands while she was talking, but honestly that was just to shock her even more. I literally laughed in her face while talking to her, hoping that she'd get the hint, but she kept on blabbering about how we were soulmates and that I needed to call off the wedding before I made a huge mistake. Honestly, the only reason I'm even entertaining any of this is so that she doesn't end up doing anything stupid. I've been trying to get through to her parents so they can take her away but haven't been able to get through, so I'm just waiting for them to respond, and after that, I'll finally be able to get rid of her once and for all. Don't get me wrong, I still hate her, but I also don't want her to hurt herself. I'm not that inhuman. Update 2. Hey guys. So we're officially married now. It's been a couple of days since the ceremony and I still can't believe it. She's now my wife. I'm thrilled, but unfortunately, there's still sad news. Her friends ended up not showing up to the wedding despite my attempts to get them to come. I personally called each of them up to explain why I'd done what I'd done and why I didn't want to apologize, but they didn't care much for it. Even when I asked them to attend just for my wife's sake, they weren't too hot on it, and it just seemed bizarre to me because I'd surely attend a friend's wedding, even if I didn't particularly like the person they were getting married to. I only learned the real reason yesterday when my wife finally confessed that she'd had a feeling her friends wouldn't attend whether or not I apologized, simply because of the fact that she'd refused to do what they'd asked of her and had disagreed with them. They didn't like that one bit and believed that they were all one unit, so they always needed to have a united front. These were her friends from high school, and while she'd managed to somehow retain them throughout the years because they never really had anything important to disagree upon, this was the first time that their friendship was tested, and she decided to choose me over her friends, which they didn't like at all. She said that she was a little upset about it but was too embarrassed to admit it because it was all so juvenile. I didn't mind though, since at least now I was sure that this wasn't really my fault and her friends were just self-centered. My wife even said that part of her was glad that they'd refused to attend because she could finally stop trying to fit in all the damn time and could live life on her own terms without constantly having to seek her friends' approval. So that was good for us, I suppose. Also, my ex's parents finally responded to me on the evening before my wedding. I explained to them hurriedly what their daughter had tried to do and how they needed to get to the hotel she'd been staying in and take her back with them for her own safety because she was being really psychotic and delusional, and I didn't think it's okay for her to be on her own. As it turns out, they'd been on a hiking trip where they had no network, but now that they were back, they promised me that they'd come to take her back as soon as they could and even thanked me for informing them. I haven't heard from them since, but I'm guessing they got her back home safely. Update 3. Hi guys. It's been a week since my wedding and unfortunately, it's been nothing but drama so far. As I'd mentioned, my girlfriend or her parents hadn't been in touch with me since the last time I spoke to her parents. I'd assumed that they'd take her home, but apparently not. 2 nights ago, there was a knock at our door, and since it was really late, my wife and I had no idea who it could be because we weren't expecting anyone. I made the mistake of opening the door before looking through the cameras, and when I opened up, my ex pushed past me and walked in with her bags. My wife was sitting on the couch and literally sprang to her feet as soon as my ex walked in. I was about to ask her what she was doing in my house, but before I could say anything, she told me that she was here to stay. She told me that her parents had come to bring her home a few days back, but she'd refused to go since she knew that I would take her back soon. My wife and I were stunned and had no idea how to react because of how crazy all of this seemed. She told me that her parents had tried to force her to go back with them, but she'd had a huge fight with them and ended up staying at the hotel. But now she was running out of money, so she decided to move to my place instead. The reason was that if I spent enough time with her once again, then I'd be reminded of the past and I'd fall back in love with her once more. I absolutely had no idea how to react simply because of how bizarre all of this was. My wife tried to speak to her, but she ignored her presence altogether and continued speaking to me, demanding that I let her live with us. I told her as gently as I could that I was a married man now and she couldn't just show up here to live with me. But she said that she didn't accept the wedding, so in her eyes I was still unmarried. I couldn't believe that this was happening, but neither did I have the heart to kick her out because honestly, she seemed seriously unstable and it appeared to me that she needed help. So I sat her down and told her to wait in the living room while I went to the bedroom with my wife to discuss what we should do next. Thankfully, my wife was also quite sympathetic and knew that there was something seriously off about how my ex was behaving. She needed serious professional help and we realized it. I tried to get through to her parents, but they didn't accept my calls and texted back saying that they couldn't force her to come back anymore, and she was clearly too psychotic to live with them, so she was on her own now. They were clearly embarrassed of her, and it was shameful how they were ready to just abandon their own daughter once they realized she was going through something. With no other option left, I decided to call my own parents, who showed up within half an hour. My ex had fallen asleep on the couch in the meantime, and that was really lucky since when my parents arrived, we decided to take her to a therapist as soon as possible because there was no telling what she was capable of doing at this point. My wife and I let her stay that night because honestly, neither of us could bring ourselves to hate her anymore because of how sad the whole situation was. Clearly something had snapped in her mind and she needed to be treated for it at the earliest. And the poor woman didn't even have her parents to count on anymore. My parents and I took her to the hospital the next day and she was still rambling about how she was glad that I was finally coming around and had even started planning our wedding. We took her to see a mental health professional, but she refused, saying that she felt perfectly fine. Anyway, after a lot of struggle and complications, the doctors managed to calm her down with some meds and administered some drugs to her that I don't remember the names of. After that, she seemed significantly calmer, and 1 or 2 hours later, she finally said that she wanted to go home. I brought her home and we'd let her rest in a room while my family and I sat in the living room thinking about what to do next. My wife and I were really relieved when she said that she wanted to go home now and even helped her pack her stuff in the trunk of our car, and we drove her home together. She was silent throughout, and so were we, because what could we even say in a situation like this? Once she got home, she apologized to both of us for the trouble that she'd caused and said that she was ashamed of everything that had happened. My wife and I felt incredibly awkward during this whole thing, but we told her that it was all right and advised her to take care of herself before driving back home. I didn't know if it would help or not, but I did contact my ex's mother and filled her in on everything that had happened, and I guess that finally made them realize the gravity of the situation. She told me that she's moved in with her daughter and said that she'll keep us updated, and despite whatever has happened so far, my wife and I truly wish that she gets better. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. My wife whooshed when a woman was thirsty for her. My wife and I used to be vendors at local anime, slop culture, SLV, and video game conventions around our province. We often stayed with friends in different cities we visited, as this gave us a chance to catch up and have fun after each day. After one convention, we went out to karaoke with our friends to unwind. It was a small local dive bar where most of the patrons were regulars, and new singers for karaoke are cheered heartily. My wife was in her late 30s and, despite my insistence of her beauty, starting to feel a little self-conscious about her looks and age. She comes from the Philippines and also lived in Taiwan, where karaoke was a common pastime, so she is actually really talented as a singer. She sang a song or two to the cheers of the crowd, and one woman bought her a drink as congratulations for a wonderful song. Later, that same woman asked my wife to duet a couple of songs. My wife was so happy that someone other than just close friends wanted to hear her sing and was so supportive. The woman eventually joined our table and sat beside my wife, opposite me, and chatted up my wife for the rest of the night. Soon, when we're all ready to leave, the woman asks if my wife is staying with friends or needs a room, seeing as we are from out of town. My wife says we already booked a place to stay, but thanks anyway, and maybe we can do karaoke again soon because it was so fun. We headed back to our Airbnb, and as soon as we were in the door, I mentioned how cruel my wife was to break that poor lesbian's heart. She immediately said, "What? What do you mean? She was just being friendly." I laid it out to my wife that the woman bought drinks, sang duets, then sat beside her and was touchy-feely for the rest of the evening. She was hitting on my wife all night, and my wife was oblivious. I watched as all the pieces finally started to fall into place in my wife's mind. Oh my God! What? Why didn't you tell me sooner? My wife was both hilariously embarrassed and flattered that another woman was attracted to her in such a way. To this day, I still tease her about the one that got away. And you? Yes, you. Would you be okay with letting your wife or husband be flirted with by someone of the same gender? Now on to the next story. Story 3. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. Listen up, folks. Prepare to be blown away by my jaw-dropping story. I'm just a regular 17-year-old, right? Well, brace yourselves because life took an unexpected turn. Fresh off my high school graduation, I'm proud to announce that I've been a straight-A student since forever. Hold on to your seats because here's the real shocker. For almost 2 years now, I've been sharing a roof with none other than my 37-year-old single mom. Oh, and did I mention that she's the genius head chef at our city's finest Italian eatery? Unbelievable, right? When I was just 10, my parents split up and went their separate ways. They used to share custody of me, but then my dad got diagnosed with brain cancer. He used to run his family's trucking business, but he had to give it all up when he got sick. Before, I used to switch homes every week, but now I'm stuck living with my mom all the time because of my dad's terrible condition. Despite visiting my dad frequently, I couldn't help but feel a constant longing to live with him again. The truth is, I've always been much more attached to my dad than my mom, who has always been extremely uptight, making it impossible for us to connect. Our relationship was constantly filled with conflict, first between my mom and dad, and after their divorce, it shifted to me. She had her good moments too, though, so I didn't mind staying with her. And after my dad's diagnosis, I had no choice but to stay with her, so I made my peace with it. My mother and I, in the recent past, have not been on good terms, mostly because of her relationship with her new husband and how he treats me. My mother got married for a second time just 8 months ago to Mark, 32, male. She'd been dating Mark for a little over 1 year, and I only found out about it when he proposed because she'd kept their relationship well under wraps. It was the significant age gap between the two, and my dad had just been diagnosed at the time, which also didn't help, so she just kept it a secret. It was only after he popped the question that she revealed their relationship. I was forced to accept it despite my deep dislike and mistrust towards Mark. He always seemed fake and insincere, even when he pretended to be kind. Something was just not right about him, if you catch my drift. Of course, I couldn't tell my mother that because then she'd think I was trying to discourage her from getting married on purpose or some other ridiculous thing. I put up with Mark, but I didn't allow him to be my friend, and I realized I was right about him just 3 months after the wedding. He'd moved in with us after the wedding, and since he was a high school football coach, he'd be home a lot earlier than my mother. We'd end up spending a lot of time at home by ourselves before my mother came home, and surprisingly, he never tried to even speak to me when we were on our own. But as soon as my mother would be home, he'd turn on the charm and try to act like we were best buddies. Anyone in their right mind would be able to see right through his little act, and to my horror, I realized I wasn't alone. I decided to grab a bite from the kitchen when suddenly I heard a bone-chilling sound coming from my mother's room. It sent shivers down my spine, knowing that only my family knew about the hidden safe she kept beneath her bed, which she guarded with her life. I always kept the spare keys close by, but I had never given them to Mark, so I realized that he must have stolen my mom's set. The locker contained all of my mother's wedding jewelry back from when she got married to my dad and a lot of other really expensive jewelry too. She also kept some spare bundles of cash stashed away in the locker for emergencies. She didn't trust bank lockers and preferred to keep these valuables close to herself because she felt it was considerably safer. It was a whole thing. I watched Mark take out an entire bundle of cash and put it in his pocket. I was too shocked to even move and stayed rooted to my spot. So when Mark turned around, he spotted me standing right outside the bedroom. He looked irritated for a second and then gave me a big smile, walked towards me, and then put his arm around my shoulder while walking me to the living room couch. There, he claimed that my mother urgently requested him to fetch a load of money for an emergency situation, and he was on his way to deliver it. He insisted that this was completely ordinary and it wasn't necessary for me to discuss it with my mother. Determined, I planned to confront my mother about it as soon as she returned home that day, but as soon as I started the conversation, she told me she didn't want to hear it. I just sat her down in private and told her that I had something to talk to her about with regard to Mark, and as soon as I said that, she shot me down instantly. She told me that she'd seen this coming and knew this was going to happen at some point or the other. My mom thought I was going to tell her the same old Mark is not the right guy for you. And for some reason, she believed that I was going to try and ask her to patch things up between her and my dad. I don't know why she assumed that because I'd never made it seem like I thought she and my dad were good together or whatever. I was so relieved when they finally split because it was way better than them staying together and torturing me with their constant fights every single day. I tried to talk to her about it, but she totally freaked out and threatened to punish me if I dared speak a single bad word about Mark. That pissed me off, so I decided that she could suffer for all I care since she was clearly too taken by Mark's surface-level attractiveness to notice what a loser he was. If she wanted to believe a lie and stay delusional, then I wasn't going to stop her, especially after she'd insulted me like that. I didn't bring up the incident with Mark after that and waited for my mother to catch on herself, which she unfortunately never did. Months passed like this, and I grew more and more distant from my mother because she was obsessed with her husband, and it was just gross, simply because it was Mark of all people. Then, about a week ago, my mother decided to sit me down and talk to me about something very important. It was the weekend, and Mark was out with his friends, so it was just my mother and I. My first thought was that there was bad news about my dad, but she told me that wasn't it and started to beat around the bush about irrelevant things. I didn't know what she was trying to get at, and so after some time I got fed up with her and told her to cut to the chase already. She suddenly exclaimed that she wanted me gone from the house immediately because Mark, her husband, told her that he felt uncomfortable around me and that I made him feel unsafe and unwanted. I knew my mother really liked Mark, but I never expected this. It made no sense for her to kick me out just because her insecure husband felt uneasy about nothing. I knew that Mark was afraid of me telling my mother about the locker incident and also just generally scared that someday I'd force my mother to take her rose-colored glasses off and see him for what he truly was. But he didn't have any reason to worry because after the way my mother had spoken to me when I tried to tell her the truth, she had made sure that I didn't say anything to her at all beyond that point. In any case, I was so bloody done with my mom that I didn't even bother to argue with her and just said, "Okay." Then got up and started packing. My head was pounding with anger while I was packing, and I honestly wanted to wait for Mark to come home so I could punch him in the face. But then I found my mother's spare keys to the locker and had a better idea. I snuck into my mom's room while she was watching television in the living room, grabbed her bag, took out the keys, and then took them away. I also left a note in her purse saying that if she wanted to know where her original keys were, she could talk to Mark about it to make sure that he wouldn't get away with this scot-free. I packed up my stuff, including clothes, books, and other things I needed. When I said goodbye to my mom in the living room, she was shocked. She didn't think I was going to leave that day and had been sitting there watching TV instead of helping me. In spite of the initial shock, she got over it super quickly and hugged me goodbye. There was not a single tear in her eye, and neither did she seem unhappy about the situation. It was painfully evident that none of this seemed problematic to her at all. I left the house and boarded the bus that took me to my dad's house, which happened to be far away from my mother's place. It was about 2,000 miles away in the suburbs, which is part of the reason why I used to live with my mom. My dad was still undergoing treatment and had to be in and out of the hospital frequently. He lived with his brother, who took care of him, and whenever I visit him, which is almost every week, I try to keep the conversation light and positive so he wouldn't worry too much about me. I missed him, but I also cared about him and his wife way too much, so I had never said anything about Mark or my mother with him. Whenever he'd asked me how I was doing at home and how my mother and her new husband were treating me, I lied to him and told him that it was all good. But now I had no choice but to reveal the horrifying truth to him, and I did so without hesitation because it was crucial for him to be aware of it. I disclosed every detail, including the events of that fateful day. My dad became so furious that his ears actually turned red, a sight I had never witnessed before. I was a little worried that he'd fly off the handle, and that wouldn't be good for his health, but he managed to contain himself. Just to pacify him, I also told him how I'd taken the keys and the note that I left, which would ensure that my mother found out about Mark's thieving. That seemed to make him feel slightly better, and he told me that I was clever for doing that. My dad and my uncle then told me not to worry about anything and said that they were perfectly fine with taking care of me. The one and only reason they'd even agreed to let me move in with my mom full-time was because they thought it would be easier and more convenient for me, but if this was the case, then they'd happily take me back. I was also much happier with my dad and my uncle, so I didn't really mind that my mother had sent me away. On the first day, I didn't hear back from my mother at all, and neither did my father, but the very next day, my mother sent me a video of Mark sobbing and apologizing to me for whatever had happened. He was begging me to come back because he'd realized that he'd screwed up by stealing from the woman who'd put her heart and soul into the relationship. My mother texted me saying that this video was supposed to be proof that Mark did feel guilty about whatever he had done and for forcing her to kick me out. My plan had worked, and when she'd noticed the missing keys and the note, she'd confronted Mark about it, and he'd been left with no choice but to come out with the truth. I took pleasure in watching him cry, but then my mom texted me saying she'd only forgive him if I returned. It went from being enjoyable to downright frustrating. She should have realized I'd rather endure hell than go back to that place where I was constantly ignored. I was either invisible or being treated like a burden, and neither of those two choices seemed like something anyone would want to pick from. And for my mother to even leave the choice to me was ridiculous because it should have been her choice to end that marriage and apologize to me for what she did. If Mark was the bad guy here, so was she, and probably even worse than Mark because at least he wasn't related to me. She, being my mom, had kicked me out for another man, and that was unforgivable. It wasn't just Mark who should have been apologizing, but she should also have been regretting what she put me through. Instead, she was treating this as some sort of sick game. I didn't understand why she left the fate of her marriage up to me to be decided, but since she had left it up to me, I chose to say that I wasn't going to come back and she had to leave Mark. In response to that, she sent me another video of a much calmer but still upset-looking Mark saying that he understood where I was coming from, but he loved my mom and just needed one last opportunity to prove it to us. He sounded like he was on the verge of tears and was going to start begging me on his knees any moment now, and that made me feel bad, but I still wasn't convinced, so I said that my decision was final. To that, my mother finally replied, saying that I was being way too harsh on both of them. Two supposedly mature adults are desperately begging for my forgiveness, going so far as to endanger their own happiness in marriage just to please me. Yet I callously disregard their efforts and instead strive to distance myself even more. I couldn't bring myself to respond to her message, opting instead to completely ignore it. Astonishingly, she has persistently bombarded me with messages over the past 6 days, desperately attempting to win me back, and every single day there's a video message from her and Mark where they apologize to me for treating me badly. She's told me repeatedly in the videos that unless I agree to come back, she'll file for divorce to prove to me that she's serious. Yesterday, she even told me that she'd been speaking to a lawyer and sent me texts to prove that it was true. Mark also looked upset in the video message they sent and begged me to forgive him because he couldn't afford to lose a woman like my mother. I know that I'm destroying their marriage, but to be honest, I feel like whatever my mother is doing is really sick, and I can't bring myself to dignify it with a response of any kind. Not only is she torturing her own husband, but she's also putting me through something very unnecessary because I don't think I'm the one who needs to make a call about what to do in a situation like this. She shouldn't be putting the responsibility of deciding with regards to her marriage on my shoulders in the first place. Does that make me look like the reason their marriage had to end was because her daughter wasn't happy about her marriage? Everyone knows it's not true. I don't want to feel bad, but she's cornering me so I can't escape. But seriously, Mark is a terrible person, and it's insane that he's letting himself be treated like this just because my mother's richer than him. It's dehumanizing, and I can't believe he's just letting her do this to him every day. I haven't told my dad about it because I don't want him to worry about me, and I know if I tell him, he'll definitely intervene, and that'll be another dramatic showdown that I don't want him to take on. I feel terrible, but I don't know what to do here. It's awful refusing to decide whether my mother should divorce her failing husband. Update 1. Hey guys, so I read the comments on my original post, and the general consensus was that I should tell my dad about what I was going through instead of trying to deal with all my problems myself. I guess it's true because I do tend to take it all on myself instead of speaking up and asking for help when I need help. I feel bad telling my dad because I think it might be bothersome for him since he has so much on his plate already. I mean, he's a literal cancer patient, so it's not easy for me to go to him with my problems the way I used to before his diagnosis. I think if I just tried to talk to him, then maybe I wouldn't have had to go through so much because he wouldn't have allowed it at all. Like this time, I finally told my dad all about my mother and her sick techniques, and he called her up and tore into her. She tried to tell my dad that this was none of his business, but he wasn't having it and told her that he'd be filing for full custody and that he'd make sure she doesn't ever get to see me after this. She pretended to protest, but deep down, my dad and I realized she was completely indifferent towards me. Her main concern was how she would be perceived by others when they discovered she lost custody of her only child because she prioritized her husband over her own flesh and blood. That's why she relentlessly battled my dad for me, not out of love but for her selfish reputation. If she loved me, she would have been a better mother, and that was something she'd never even tried to be. Now it was just too late. After the phone call with my mom, my dad explained to me the same things that people in the comments had told me. That I was his daughter and that I didn't need to think twice before coming to him with a problem because as a father, he could never think of me as a burden. My well-being was his responsibility, and his cancer wasn't going to prevent him from giving me the best life and solving my problems whenever he needed to step in, and I needed to remember that. I won't lie, I teared up at that point because it just reminded me that even though he was a lot weaker than I remembered, he was still my strong dad underneath. I broke down completely when I realized that I actually felt safe and loved again after a really long time. All thanks to my mom and Mark. I'd completely forgotten what it was like to feel that way. But then my dad reminded me that no matter what, he would always protect me, even if it meant facing the worst diseases in the world. It sounds ridiculously sentimental, but I'm genuinely thrilled that it's the reality for me. Update 2. My dad has filed for full custody of me, and my mom isn't going to get any visitation rights either. It doesn't really matter since I'm just 1 year away from being a legal adult anyway, but my dad said that he just doesn't trust my mother anymore because her head has obviously been turned by Mark's presence in her life. Recently, she texted me to tell me that I disappointed her by dragging my dad into this even though I knew he was sick and called me a selfish, manipulative brat. She also added that she was really happy now that she hadn't actually divorced Mark over what I said. I was accused of trying to drive a wedge between them because that's the kind of petty person I was. But I failed, and she and Mark are now stronger than ever. She would gladly give up custody of me because I don't deserve to be her daughter anyway. There were a couple of other really mean things she said, but I don't care. She can say whatever she wants, but it won't change the fact that she's the one who failed as a mother. She's only freaking out because she knows my grandparents are about to completely disown her, but she doesn't even give a damn about it. She's completely obsessed with Mark. I'm at a loss for words. I've had my fair share of disagreements with my mom over the years, but this is just downright insane in my opinion. She's beyond redemption. At least my grandparents have tried to knock some sense into their daughter, but even that's not working, and if her own parents can't bring her back to her senses, then we're definitely not going to be able to accomplish that. My dad's been kind enough to allow her parents to still see me because they've never done anything wrong. I just wish she'd been able to take a leaf out of their book and learn how to have a good relationship with your ex even after divorce because even my grandparents want a divorce, and despite that, they've done their best to raise my mom to be a strong, successful woman. Now she's almost in her 40s, so they can't be held responsible for whatever she's up to now. Unfortunately, my mother failed on all fronts. As a wife, as a mother, and even as a daughter. Update 3. Hey guys, today was a seriously mind-blowing day. My mom officially cut all ties with me, and now I'm totally free from her. I went with my dad to witness this crazy moment, and guess what? I bumped into her again, maybe for the last time ever. It's like I don't even exist to her anymore. I'm so shocked and confused. I don't even know what to feel. Like, I'm sad, but I'm also relieved. I guess? I don't know. I just have mixed feelings about all of this. Mark wasn't there, which was no big surprise because that thief probably didn't have the spine to face me after whatever happened. It was only my mother's actions that really hurt me anyway. He can go to hell because he's very unimportant in my life. My dad and uncle treated me to dinner today, trying to lift my spirits. It worked a bit, but guess what? Just 2 days ago, we found out that my dad's actually improving. Can you believe it? He might actually beat cancer. Please pray for him because I can't bear the thought of losing my only parent whom I love so much. I just can't. My uncle's great, but he's not my dad, and nobody will ever be like him ever. I don't know how much time I have with him, but I just hope that whatever time we have together is only good times and nothing else. Nevertheless, I hope you guys keep us in your prayers, and thank you to all of you who responded. Now on to the next story. Story 4. I looked through my girlfriend's phone, and now I'm disgusted. I'm in an exclusive relationship with my girlfriend for 6 months. We started talking around 9 months ago, and I've known her for almost a year now. Recently, I looked through her phone while she was asleep because I had doubts about the genuineness of our relationship. Unfortunately, I found exactly what I feared. I've been cheated on before, and she knows this, but apparently she doesn't care. I discovered she was texting and seeing other guys dating back to when we were still talking exclusively. If I was texting any other girl, she would get mad. But she was doing the same. Right after turning 18, she immediately got Tinder and went out with a guy on Tinder to a place she loves and always told me she'd take me but never did. I have no idea what happened, as we were on winter break, and she never told me anything about it, but I stumbled upon it today. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hurt by this, but frankly, looking at it now, just saw the messages a couple of hours ago. I just don't care anymore, and I can't seem to look at her without feeling the need to throw up. We always got along very well, and there were no signs of anything like this happening, although I had my doubts and looked through her phone because of my previous experiences, and her mindset somewhat played a part in it too. I found messages of her telling other guys that she loves them and that she had fun on her date, which just made me lose all of my interest immediately. How should I handle this? I know quite a bit about her, and I think it would be a waste of all this time if I left this hurt and she didn't. Yes, while I could be the bigger person, I'm not going to do that because I want her to know the feeling too. Everything about our relationship was good. I took her on dates, our intimate life was great, and we were looked at as a cute couple. I can't seem to wrap my head around this, especially her not telling me and then trying to hide it from me when I saw her again. How should I handle this? If anyone has an idea besides leaving her, which I plan on, has anyone been in these same shoes? Edit. First off, I just want to start by saying thank you guys for the responses and DMs. I can see that some people are confused about the timeline and a few other things, so let me explain. I met her in fall 2022, and at first we talked and said we'd only be friends with benefits and no feelings would be involved. Then we ended up catching feelings, but we felt the same. Although she had just gotten out of a relationship around when I met her, she said she needed time before going back to dating. Not sure what this meant, to be honest. We were basically a couple without a label for this time, but I respected it, and we didn't officially start dating until spring 2023. The talking exclusively thing that I mentioned above was something that we both agreed on. Come to find out, she's been texting a couple of people that she's had a past with over the course of our relationship and the summer. And while I wasn't with her, she clearly tried to hide it. I see a lot of people saying leave without explanation, and I think that's probably my best choice after thinking it out more soberly because, as a few of you pointed out, I don't want to stoop to her level, although it's tempting. I'm also not going to tell her anything and just wait a few days until I know I'm not going to make stupid decisions and then end it. Now on to the next story. Story 5. I don't want anything to do with my crazy, delusional, psychotic sister. On a throwaway, since my family knows and stalks my stepmom, I, 26F, have been no contact with my sister Cheryl, 24F, and mother, 57F, since I turned 18. Our parents divorced when I was 14 when my mom's constant favoritism and enabling of Cheryl's abuse of me would not stop. My mom excused it as every parent has their favorite, but Cheryl took delight in stealing from me, destroying my things, and using me as a physical and emotional punching bag. My dad, after years of trying to force family counseling, mental health evaluations, and family interventions, but my mom kept enabling and at times felt like encouraging Cheryl. My dad treated divorce as a last-ditch effort to try and save what was left of my childhood. My mom demanded full custody of Cheryl in exchange for giving my dad 80/20ths of me. It was a rough battle, and he really did try to limit my custody time with mom. At 16, I was able to stay with my dad full-time and only see mom and Cheryl occasionally or at school. I suspect my mom wanted 80/20ths of me to keep me around as Cheryl's punching bag. But Cheryl's power over me lessened the instant I had the power to just walk away. It's funny. Cheryl seemed obsessed with taking from me. New phone? Taken. New tablet? Taken. Once we were both in high school and I lived with dad full-time. She couldn't blatantly steal from me anymore. Didn't stop her from trying. I had one boyfriend in high school who she tried to seduce but failed. He told me immediately and was weirded out by it. When I went to college, she DM'd me and found out if I was dating anyone. Had 2 boyfriends in college and she tried the same thing both times. They told me about Cheryl's attempts and shot her down. This part might need explanation. Cheryl is conventionally attractive, like from across the room, but since she was a teenager, she has a hygiene issue. She showers once every 2 weeks and uses a combination of scented hand lotion and perfume that combines with her BO into a new mega stench versus covering up. My last college boyfriend remarked that when she put her hand on his shoulder, he was immediately grossed out by her nails. When I was in college, Cheryl also attempted to get a credit card in my name, but I had a lock on my credit courtesy of my father who feared my mom would try this first. So, needless to say, I'm not impressed with my sister or my mom. Last night, I got a weird call from my Aunt Janice, 64F, my mom's sister. I haven't talked to this woman in nearly a decade, and suddenly she's calling me. She asked me what I heard. I heard nothing, so I was confused. She instantly was like, "Good. Cheryl needs a place to stay. Your mom kicked her out." I was immediately like, "Excuse me? No." Janice then kept begging me to let Cheryl stay at my place, at least for a few days for my mom to cool down. I told Janice that I haven't talked to Cheryl, my mom, or her in years, that you were all strangers to me, and the last time we all talked, you aren't my favorite people. Janice then kept saying, "Family helps family," and, "It's just for a few days, it'll be fine." I finally blocked the number, but I did get a confused call from cousins confused that I cut my sister and mom off, as if it happened recently and not almost a decade ago. The cousins from my mom's side rarely talked to me, so they were just as confused as I was and wanted clarification. I'm debating on telling them the details, but I'm thinking of just telling them it's not their business. But I can't help but think I should have handled the call with my aunt better. ITA for how I told my aunt that I wanted nothing to do with my mom and sister? Update 1. Talked to 2 of my cousins over the phone and explained that I've been no contact with my mom and sister since I was 18. Still saw them both a handful of times but never interacted with them directly. As suggested, gave a Cliff Notes version of what happened with my sister and mom that made me want to cut them both off. One cousin said, "Figures," and the other said, "Makes sense," and sent a message via Facebook Messenger of, "I had no idea it was that bad," and that she will leave me alone about it from now on. Overall felt good starting my Friday until noon today. My husband and I work from home, and we were both surprised when our Ring doorbell said we had someone buzzing the front door. Checked the camera and yep, it's my sister Cheryl with 2 suitcases. Went to the door and kept the screen door closed and locked but opened the front door. I could still smell her weird BO through the screen door, so her hygiene has not improved since I last knew her. Cheryl tried to go, "Hey sis," all bubbly and like half my childhood didn't happen. I asked what she wanted. She said her and mom got in a fight, wouldn't say what the fight was about, and asked to stay with me. I said absolutely not, and she started crying. Then she said she didn't want to tell me this, but her and my husband have been having a 6-month-long affair, and that she couldn't hold it in anymore, and that blood sticks with blood. It was at that moment my husband rounded the corner and said, "Say what?" My sister looked confused and asked who the hell the man behind me was, and I almost laughed because I realized what happened. Since Thanksgiving onward, my husband grew a small beard for the first time. Most of his pics on social were him cleanly shaven, so of course Cheryl would have no idea what he looked like with the beard. I said, "That's my husband," and she tried to recover. It was sad and pathetic. I simply said, "Bye, Cheryl," and closed the door. After 10 minutes of her continually buzzing the ring and knocking, pleading, and she finally left. Called both cousins and asked what the hell this is all about and why did my mom kick Cheryl, her favorite child, out. One cousin only knew bare bones, but the other knew the details. When my parents first divorced, there was a guy my mom brought in almost immediately who I call Scumbag Tom. Him showing up in the start of the divorce felt highly suspect, but he was always a weird guy that I never liked being around. I did ask my dad if he thought mom cheated on him with Tom, and he said Tom was the least of his worries and the lowest of his priorities when it came to the divorce. Long story short, Cheryl slept with Tom. Mom found out, kicked Cheryl out, and Tom stayed, swearing Cheryl tricked him somehow. Just Cheryl staying super classy, and Mom found the one thing she wouldn't tolerate Cheryl doing. God, I'm glad I cut these people out of my life. Update 2. This is a strange and developing situation. The last 12 hours have been a roller coaster. I talked to my dad again today, had him visit and told him what Cheryl had done, and Dad sat down on the couch and started laughing and crying and shaking his head. I was really worried because I was afraid he was having a medical issue. He finally caught his breath and told me the family secret. During the divorce, my mom was apparently extremely vicious and even attempted to keep me full-time. I wasn't told this. Mom went as far as to even claim I was not my dad's child and she knew who my father was and would use this to get full custody. Dad was undeterred. Even if I wasn't his child, he raised me, and he wasn't going to leave me in hell because of that. Paternity tests were ordered for both me and Cheryl, and I was Dad's child. Cheryl was not. Cheryl, however, did match the person my mom brought to be sampled. Scumbag Tom. Dad was still going between chuckling and sobbing for a few minutes while telling me and my husband this. Then there was silence which felt like it went forever. I finally asked if Scumbag Tom knew. Dad just nodded. I asked him how he felt about Cheryl. He said, "You can't just turn off being someone's dad, no matter how shitty they turn out." I had my husband take my dad to the guest bedroom after he said he needed to lie down for a moment. Around noon, my phone started ringing. It was an unknown number, but I figured it was Cheryl. I picked up and yep, Cheryl. She was again begging for any sort of help, stay with me or money for a hotel, anything. I was tired, and I admit I wanted to hurt her, so I told her. I told her who Scumbag Tom was to her. She was quiet, then begged me to tell her I was lying. I just hung up. I told my husband and father what I did, and my dad just started that weird sobbing chuckle again. My husband, however, said we should probably call my aunt and let her know what I just told Cheryl in case Cheryl becomes unstable, and at least someone would be alert for it. I do feel bad that I dropped this on Cheryl as a way specifically to hurt her. I tried justifying this isn't even a tenth of the hurt she's given me, but hurting someone doesn't feel good the longer I sit with it. Update 3. Posting here in my profile for now. Don't know where this would belong honestly. At everyone's advice, I did call my 2 cousins, and we had a real conversation. Whoever said my mom and sister controlled the narrative with that side of the family was right. According to my cousins, my dad was painted as a lowlife cheater and I as a dropout drug addict that went man-to-man. Literally only had 4 boyfriends my entire life. So when my sister was kicked out, my aunt suggested she stay at my place. The cousins were confused. Wasn't I a druggie that couch surfed and was unemployed? And apparently came up with a story that I speedran adulthood in 6 months of getting clean. An online degree, a job, a home, and a husband. Now both cousins never really liked my mom or sister. They just figured that if trash called me trash, I must have been super trash. I did tell them the truth about Cheryl and Scumbag Tom, and both were disgusted with everyone involved. They made sure that the family has been sufficiently warned now. The next part apparently happened late last night, and I'm getting this secondhand. Cheryl apparently stopped back at Mom's, and the 3 of them got into a big argument. Things were broken and thrown against the wall, and the cops were called. Cops showed up. Mom tried to get Cheryl kicked out, but apparently, Cheryl's legal address is Mom's house, so the cops told her she can't be kicked out. Same with Scumbag Tom's legal address. So as long as no one is actually assaulted, the cops didn't care. I'm now making it a habit of putting all calls from unfamiliar numbers straight to voicemail. Got 3 from new numbers last night. 2 was mom. First, her crying and pleading for her to apologize to me and begging me to understand. Second was her screaming and cursing to the point of it devolving into noise. The third call was scumbag Tom, who started with him going, "Hey kiddo." Deleted that one before it finished. Going to take the Ring doorbell footage, the past legal case of the credit card, the voicemails, the texts, and info from my cousins and get some legal orders in place now. It's all just trash, 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 trash. Update 4. I mentioned on my profile that I cleared up the narrative about me to my cousins. Mother and sister spun a tale that I was a hot mess, couldn't keep a job, slept around, did drugs, couch surfed. When my sister was kicked out, my aunt decided to suggest Cheryl stay with me, which made my cousins confused. Wasn't I a hot mess? And then made up a story that I got my life together, got clean, a degree, career, house, and husband in 6 months' time. My cousins were skeptical, but they thought that since my mom and sister were trash, if they called me trash, I must have been super trash. So they always kept a distance away. That's since been cleared up for the most part. The cousins wanted to stay away from the epicenter of drama bombs. The next part one heard in part from 2 of my cousins. Cheryl decided to head back home, and her and mom got into a big argument, and scumbag Tom decided to jump in. Cops were called, everyone's addresses were verified, and the cops' attitude was since no one was assaulted, no one is allowed to kick anyone out and left. I've been getting calls from all family members now. Mom, Cheryl, and scumbag Tom go straight to voicemail, and I'm collecting as much of it as possible, and I've been sending it to the police. My husband suggested we retain a lawyer to better handle this, which we will be doing in the next couple of days. Aunt is acting very apologetic and keeps claiming she didn't know the abuse was as intense as it was and thought the problems I had with Cheryl was stupid sibling stuff. But she said we shouldn't cut mom and Cheryl out of our lives just yet. No one else on mom's side of the family is willing to lend any help or support except for aunt. I am, however, getting more calls from cousins, second cousins, and other members of mom's family wanting to reconnect now that they know the truth. Sort of. Not sure if I should even dedicate any time to them. They didn't lend my father or I any support during the divorce or afterward. Part of me understands that it's because my mom and sister spun a hell of a narrative, but at least according to my cousins, her side of the family thought mom and Cheryl were trash anyways but still associated with them. I might reconnect more with my aunt's kids, the 2 cousins, since they approached me when this whole mess started with confusion and asked for clarification, not outright trying to browbeat me into accepting my sister into my home. Minor update. Been getting some questions and stuff. Plus there's a minor update, so here we go. People asked how my aunt and cousins had my number, and that's simple. I had the same number since I was a teenager. I've been weighing number switching, but that would mean changing the 2FA on all my apps and sign-ins, and honestly Cheryl rarely called, so it doesn't bother me. As for how Cheryl knew where I lived, that's because she's my FING psycho-stalker. Literally, when I was in college and had a boyfriend, within a week she found him at a party and tried to hit on him. If she spent 1/10 the energy she did on stalking me to getting a PI license, she would probably be the most successful PI in the state. Some people have suggested Cheryl's lack of hygiene could have meant scumbag Tom was grooming her and messing with her since we were kids. While that does make me a tiny bit sympathetic to Cheryl, I have to be honest. I haven't thought of her as family since I was a teenager. For the update, we've doubled up on home cameras, got a police file, and an attorney, and an initial protective order in place for Cheryl, mom, and scumbag Tom. The official hearing will be upcoming, but the law moves slowly. My husband, dad, and I have taken to scanning our cars for AirTags lately. No bleeps yet, but can't be too safe now. Had lunch with my 2 cousins, and they both have suggested to Aunt Janice that if she cared about Cheryl so much, that she should house her. The cousins told me that Janice broke down at that and revealed that Janice was me. Turns out my mom and Janice had a very, very similar relationship to Cheryl and Janice was the punching bag to my mom. Janice got so used to rolling over and taking it that she was confused that I refused to. Me refusing to take the role she had broke her, and she felt even more steadfast that she had to have me submit like she did as a weird, twisted way to prove that she wasn't wrong submitting all those years. Janice has booked with a family therapist because she said saying that out loud made her feel psychotic. My 2 cousins said that other than my mom, Janice was an exemplary mother, so I somewhat believe in Janice's trauma. I do feel bad for her. Maybe she will get through this. I hope she does. My cousins understand that we can't have a close cousin relationship because we weren't raised that way, but we will see if we can be friends at the very least. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.